Hello, welcome remotely, at least, to Chatham House. It's great to be speaking in the centenary week of this wonderful institution. We have a very exciting and distinguished panel here this afternoon, at least it's this afternoon where I am speaking from, to talk about the impact of the pandemic on the future of work. Just so you know, my name's Helen Mountfield. I'm a lawyer. I'm the principal at Mansfield College in Oxford, which is where I'm speaking from. But I co-chaired a commission on the future of work, and I'm now a trustee of the Institute for the Future of Work in London. I'm doing some work with the Institute on equality through the transition to a digital world. But these sorts of trends, of course, are ones that we've all been very engaged with in recent years. We've been looking at the patterns, what will happen in the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, who works where, what is the role of government, what's the role of the employer, what are technological changes going to do to the way that we work, the relationships we have at work, the share of rewards to work, and so on. Now, of course, the pandemic has supercharged this, and we are now talking and trying to trace the patterns of what is happening now, not what will happen in 3 years or 5 years. We're all playing catch up rather than being futurologists. So in this session, we have three very distinguished panelists who will give you some of their reflections on what the pandemic has done to these patterns concerning the future of work. They're going to speak for about 5 or 7 minutes each, and then we will open this up for questions. You can ask questions through the Q&A function. Those can be upvoted so that we try to identify the questions that most participants are interested in most. And if you like to turn on your camera and microphone at the point when you ask a question, I'll call people to ask questions, and then you can ask them directly to the panelists, bearing in mind we have a limited time frame, so please keep them as short as you can. So with that, I'm going to introduce you to our three speakers this evening. We'll start with Sir Christopher Pissarides. Chris is Regius Professor of Economics at the London School of Economics, and also affiliated to most other major universities in the world. He's currently helping advise the Greek government on some of their work on the financial issues arising from the crisis. He is a specialist in the economics of labour markets. He's the co-chair of the Institute for the Future of Work, which arose from the Future of Work Commission. And as he modestly says, if I want, I can mention that he was a Nobel laureate for economics in 2010. So I'll just drop it in casually and pretend I'm not hugely impressed, which of course we all are. Then we have our next panelist is Dr. Ilham Mansour Al-Dakil. Dr. Ilham is the Chief Executive Officer of Dur Al-Kutab, which is an education company established in 2016. The name means Circle of Solidarity, and it arises from a strategic alliance between the Higher Education Fund of the Ministry of Education of Saudi Arabia and the Mulkia Investment Company. And she has also established the IMD consultancy firm and been its chief executive since 2013. So welcome, Ilham. And then we will move swiftly from Oxford, Cyprus, and Saudi Arabia to New York, where Jenny Sparandara will speak to us. She leads JPMorgan Chase's global workforce portfolio as the executive director of its global philanthropy division. And in that role, she implements the firm's commitment to expanding economic inclusion through a number of innovative programs, as well as leveraging the firm's vast resources and employees. So she can talk about that. And before that, she operated in the voluntary sector and in government, most recently as the executive director of the Job Opportunity Investment Network. So welcome all. And Chris, would you like to kick off with your observations?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be talking on this 100th anniversary, isn't it? I always followed Chatham House, spoke many times before, and long may it continue another century at least. What I want to say by way of introductory remarks about the future of work is to say where we were before the pandemic arrived and what is it doing to the challenges that we're facing before, and what action do we need to take urgently. Now, a few months ago, 5-6 months ago, whenever we talked about the future of work, and in fact we had meetings at Chatham House talking about it, we were saying that the big challenge is how to manage a structural transformation in the labor market when it comes to jobs, from jobs that can be automated, can be taken over by robots, by artificial intelligence, computer software, to jobs that cannot be done by machines and still need the human brain or human hands. And the big challenge that we're facing in the future of work is how to manage this transition. There were many jobs closing down at one end of the labor market, but equally jobs opening up at the other end of the labor market. And I've always been on the optimistic side that the number of jobs is not the problem. The challenge is not where to find the jobs. The challenge is how to prepare workers to do the new jobs. Now, COVID arrives, and first information that we're getting from the labor market and from big companies is that the process of automation is accelerating. Because if you were planning to accelerate over a longer period of time, say 5 years, not rely on human labor so much, why not do it sooner now with COVID? And rather alarmingly, the process of creating the jobs in what you might call the people contact sectors is slowing down because COVID doesn't allow human contact. It's as if you suddenly threw a spanner into the jobs that involve human contact, and therefore they become socially more expensive to create. Now, those jobs are in health and care, where needs are even more, but they're not the safest of jobs. In the hospitality industry, which has closed down almost completely, travel, tourism, retailing, that kind of job. Now, those jobs, one of the positive things about those jobs, if you like, as opposed to the ones getting automated, which were mainly manufacturing, heavy manual labor, which has been taken over by robots, is that the distribution of jobs in the market, it was going to be more equitable. It was a sort of woman-friendly structural transformation, if you like, in contrast to previous ones we had, which were rather male-friendly, the ones that created more manufacturing jobs. Now that this is coming, of course, it's affecting mainly women going into the labor force. It's affecting lower skills because they're being taken over by robotics, and they're not finding new jobs as easily. And sooner or later, artificial intelligence will also affect more senior jobs. So what's the challenge now? Well, the challenge before was the transition, as I mentioned, of workers from one type of job to another. The challenge now is also job creation. Combine the difficulty of transition for workers from the declining jobs to expanding jobs, take away the expanse from those jobs, and you have this massive problem that we're facing now. Now, even the transition is not of the same kind, because many services that relied only on human contact, in other words, what we needed to do was to train workers into better use of soft skills, especially people leaving manufacturing and hard labor jobs, now require digital skills because work is done from home. You know, who could have imagined, for example, that doctors and nurses would have their consultation on the phone? Who could imagine that education would be online? You know, I have a child in school for the last 3 months. He's been doing online education. He's become expert in the use of digital technology. He sometimes tells me how to get into Zoom. Therefore, whole sectors need redesigning. We need new skills. Now, who is going to do this training? I always believe that in the old type of transition, the old type of challenge that we're facing, the training had to be done in companies because they knew best what their needs were. but subsidized by government, because as economists we know that there is a kind of free rider problem in the provision of training. A big company might train someone, and then a small company takes that worker away and doesn't pay for the training. Therefore, the government has to subsidize the training. Now, however, we're entering a situation where the new skills have to be digital, they have to be new types of work, and not many companies are doing it as yet. So a situation is arising where the training needs to be provided by institutions that are set up for the purpose, or universities or colleges of training that are especially trained, they design courses especially to train workers into those skills. So that's adding another problem. How are workers going to be supported? That is going to take long. I do believe we need a strong system of social support. Low incomes or no incomes need to be supported. Who pays for the training? I believe it should be funded in the same way as post-compulsory school education is funded. Strong government support. We have the German apprentice system, which is good, especially for lower skills, but here we're talking about higher skills as well. So there are all these issues that need to be discussed and need to be brought out, and that's what we're doing at the Institute for the Future of Work, mainly. You mentioned the group that you're in, which is looking into these digital skills as well and how to do it, and it is a challenge. You know, we had a challenge going on as part of this transition, and now this transition has become ever so much more difficult, and at the same time it needs to be speedier than before. So we have a kind of double whammy hitting us, and at this not so encouraging thought, I leave you. No further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. That was very interesting. Ilan, would you like to give us your thoughts on this issue?
Well, what Chris was talking about is that's how we started. Let me just take a step back. I have had the honor of chairing the Future of Work and Education Task Force for the B20. And for those who are not familiar with the B20, it represents the global business community in the G20. So what our mandate is to recommend policy to the leaders of these 20 countries who represent 80% of the GDP, the global GDP, and almost 75% of the global trading. So these are very influential leaders. So our job is to present to them policy recommendations to improve the efficiency and productivity of the global market, of the labor market. And that's how we started in November. And I have a task of about 100 different members from around the world in these 20 countries. And they worked very diligently to deal with the shortcomings and issues that were existing in the labor market, to study what kind of recommendation would we submit to those leaders. And then COVID-19 hit. And then we became in the middle of the worst employment crisis that you can face. And we had to kind of reorganize ourselves to have an immediate action for recommendation actions to those leaders, to this 20 country leaders, to take action now and then look at the long term. So we were almost working on 3-time horizon: immediate, intermediate, and long. Immediate, what can we do now to protect what's happening? And then what can we do to have a safe and swift return to work? Then what can we do to revive the economy? And then what kind of plans should we put into place to have a more resilient workforce that will be able to observe future shocks, because we know that there are upcoming shocks. It's not only COVID-19. We're going to face artificial intelligence, the fourth industrial, the Internet of Things. A lot of shocks will be coming into. So the labor market we have to learn the lessons from what happened to us, and how can we make the world of work more resilient and more inclusive to observe these future shocks. So we kind of altered our plans, and we start making recommendations to the government using 3 strategies: protect, prioritize, and plan. Protect the urgent situation now, and prioritize your priority. Find out the most vulnerable groups like women. Just to take women as a sample, women are usually work on the low-paying jobs. Before COVID-19, women are usually working in the informal jobs, which is almost present 60% of the labor market. And these women have no social protection. So can you imagine what happened to them when they have COVID-19 hit? Women are usually, have serious issue in the digital sector, which is upcoming. So just to think about only 7.5 of the coders in global coders is women. 7.5 only. And women are escaping the digital sector. They're not increasing in that sector. So that was a red flag also. So there is a lot of issue that we needed to take care of immediately. And there are long-term issues that we also addressed, like we wanted to focus on 3 themes: getting the government leaders of these 20 countries to put together an action plan with a roadmap, something that can be implemented. We asked for jump-starting the engine of growth, which is SMEs and entrepreneurship, which almost hire 80% of the employment. We asked to build the employability, build a future human capital, whether looking to education and looking at lifelong learners. So these are the issues that we've been handling. We hope that we submit this recommendation on upcoming November, and we're hoping, and there is a lot of implementation of what we have been working on. The amazing things is when crisis hit, people act. And so we did have a lot of our thoughts and our recommendation already been implemented, and we're looking forward for the others to be taken care of and adopted in November. So in brief, that's what we've been doing.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Ilham. Can I remind you, the global audience, to start submitting your questions for the Q&A session as we go, so that we can run swiftly onto them and get through as many as possible during the session. And please don't be shy. We like questions from everybody. As Ilham said, it's very important that women and men both contribute to this debate. So please don't be shy about that. Jenny, let's hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. And I have to just say, I'm so happy to be here, calling in from New York today, quarantine in New York. But I will say I'm terribly disappointed that the Chatham House rules are not in effect, because I grew up professionally with that sort of kicking off all sorts of meetings. And so I was so delighted to participate in a Chatham House event, but hopefully this means I can come back and they will be in effect and nobody will know what is discussed. But just to build on a little bit of the introduction you shared, and then certainly what Chris and Ilham have been describing, at JPMorgan Chase, my job is really about looking at the ways the company can contribute to the communities in which we are doing business, in which our employees work, and really thinking about our responsibility as a good corporate citizen in those places. Specifically, I look after our philanthropic portfolio that is wholly dedicated to the issues that we're discussing today. Namely, how is it that we work to get more people in our communities working in family-sustaining wage jobs that offer career mobility? And how do we really think about the role of philanthropic capital to spur new innovation, to test new ideas that, I think to Chris's point, really then need to be sustained and scaled through other mechanisms, but where we can kind of take on some of that risk with resources sort of wholly meant for that purpose. We have, for the last 6 years, been focused on issues of economic inclusion and the world of work through our philanthropic agenda. And that's largely been driven by the fact that we are a company with a tremendous workforce ourselves. We've got about more than 200,000 people who work for JPMorgan Chase around the world. What's more is we hear from clients and customers all the time what a differentiator talent is. So I think, it's always made sense to us to align our philanthropic agenda with who we are as a business at our core. And to me, I think that gives us a real pragmatic approach to what it is that we are investing in communities, because I think we're sort of riding alongside as a company and trying to understand what works so that we can think about how we adopt and implement some of those practices within our own firm. Just quickly to kind of pick up on some of these questions around the future of work and the pandemic in particular. As I was sharing before the call, we relaunched our agenda on the future of work about 1.5 years ago. And so we were talking about a number of these themes. In particular, we were thinking about economic mobility and just how important that kind of continual upgrading of skills was, not just for workers at the sort of lower levels of the occupational hierarchy, but all through the mix, if you will, but recognizing that there were going to be these disproportionate impacts on those who were already more vulnerable or tenuously connected to the labor market. So needless to say, March rolls around. Because we are based in places like Hong Kong, China, we were seeing the effect of the pandemic hit in various markets in which we work and do business. And we began to realize quickly that we would have to, I think, accelerate some of the work we were doing, but pivot as well. And I'll just kind of acknowledge a few of the strategies that we're sort of supporting and how, I hope we can engage on them a little bit more during the Q&A. But, I mentioned we had been focused on creating opportunities for low-income workers to advance their careers and improve their earnings. One of the places we think philanthropic capital can be particularly useful is in serving to support intermediaries that align business and industry need with education and workforce systems, really thinking about how you have to have these pieces working together to support quality skills training, enable people to gain industry recognized credentials or build their skills as Chris was describing, both soft skills and technical skills. I think, a question that has dogged us for a good long while, and it's not just, I think, in our corner of the world, but is how do you take promising models to scale? What are the related and required policy interventions, government actions, but also employer practices that enable more people to benefit and share in the sort of development of our economy, of our business practices. And then something I know we're all looking at, and many of these commissions focus on, how do you identify and forecast those future skills that will be in demand? How do you move educational and workforce systems at a speed with which they're able to respond to those demand signals? So we've funded efforts, I think, to both enable the business community to speak more clearly, more singularly, more tactically in terms of what those knowledge, skills, competencies are, but then also looked at how do we have to support the capacity of educational institutions and job training organizations and many other sort of nonprofit, for-profit entities to be able to receive those demand signals and then play a productive role in skilling people. the last 2 points maybe I'd make is that we've been focused on this issue of occupational segregation for years. And I think Ilham just made an important point about the role of women in the world of work. You know, in the 38 countries where we're making these investments, that population may look different in terms of who's been historically disadvantaged or for various and complicated reasons may not be able to partake in the opportunity that are being created. I do think the pandemic has sharpened our focus on populations, on vulnerable populations, and I think in ways that I hope will be positive, really forced all sorts of stakeholders in this equation to be much clearer about those disproportionate effects. So just real quickly, if you look at the racial wealth divide in the United States, we know that tens of millions of workers have filed for unemployment insurance, 100,000 small businesses have permanently closed. But while the pain has been widespread, it has not been equally shared. And one of the research projects we recently supported found that workers of color, immigrant workers, and especially women have been hardest hit by the loss of jobs and income and are disproportionately employed in the lowest wage jobs and the essential jobs that somewhat ironically then also place them at the greatest risk in terms of contracting the virus. So I don't think it's all very sobering, and we certainly want to be I think action-oriented as ever. I think the opportunity for us is that, and I think a few folks have mentioned this already, a crisis like this really does give us an opportunity to pull pieces together and to push on levers that perhaps have not been pushed to the greatest extent possible. And so in that, I think we're really interested in how JPMorgan Chase can support solutions and really be both part of and a contributing force in the partnerships that are going to be needed to make, I think, real appreciable change and impact moving forward.
Thank you. Keep adding questions to the Q&A box if you'd like to. You can tweet about this at #JHCentenary, but ask the questions first because this is the revolution televised and live. Can I start with Jeremy Ross, who's asked a couple of great questions. Jeremy, do you want to ask those questions? Do you want to come unmuted and ask those directly?
Thank you, Helen. My point is essentially this, that you have got a whole range of people who are in the market, maybe with low to intermediate skills, who aren't necessarily going to have long-term sustainable jobs. What can be done in order to protect them and to offer them, if like, a ladder that enables them to maintain, if not improve, their occupational mobility and participation?
I could start, if you like, and say a few things about it. You see, there are. I mean, you can look at it in two ways. The first one is whether, and the tone of the written question, in fact, was slightly different from the one that was spoken, in the sense that the written question said that, it was implying as if companies are misbehaving and they're putting all these workers into intermittent employment and so on. Whereas the way it was asked, it was some different in the sense that there are jobs that are structured like that, and what do we do about them? So let me take both in turn. Now the principle on which we have to start is that a job relationship should be voluntary between the employer and the employee. We don't live in a society where we can force a job relationship to be, to micromanage a job, if you like, from outside. What the role of the government, the role of policies, is to make sure that human rights are observed, that there is a minimum wage that the company has to pay, so there are no monopolies in the market that exploit workers, that there is enough social support. Now, with respect to jobs where the structure of the job encourages you to move in the direction of short-term working, 0 hours contract, intermediate working, the Taylor review really made an excellent start, and that is that the government should then ensure that those jobs are proper jobs, that the companies do observe the minimum wage, they do pay the social contributions, national insurance contributions, they do provide the training that is needed for those jobs. I mean, think of delivery jobs or drivers. Am I allowed to say Uber drivers? I guess it's a general term now. It's not just a company when people talk about the Uberization of work.
Uber is the new Uber. You can go for it.
Yeah, and government needs to ensure that there is a framework for those jobs, because in the past, the government employment framework has always been geared to the 9-to-5 job. So that's one situation. Now the other one, where a company might say, okay, I've taken a worker on, and although it's an ongoing demand for labor, I'm going to rotate the workers, I'm going to put them on intermittent jobs. That's not good. And the reason for that is that they might be uncertain about the future. They might be shy about training. That's the type of job that I was hinting at before, that the government needs to support the training actively and needs to support the worker in the meantime, so that the company will want to keep that worker for as long as the job is active, because that worker becomes the one who has learned the job, that has taken the training course, and has become more productive in that company. We're facing two different situations. I don't think actually there are many companies that will say, I do need labor, but I'm going to play around with short-term and 0 hours and see where it gets me. It's just not good for them. But we do need to regulate the market for, delivery people and, the Airbnbs and Ubers and all that, these new digital jobs, if you like, that are coming up because of the technology possibilities.
Yeah. Jenny, Ilham, would you like to say anything on this question?
He raised a very important question, actually. There is two steps to look at it. The first step is now, which is how to protect these people now. And this is where the government has to look at the stimulus that they're doing and look at it from equity, not equality point of view, which means we look at the vulnerable groups and we see how that stimulus affect each group differently. And that's very critical and important to give us the results to save these jobs and to save these people from the situation where they are now. So stimulus, whether it's wage supporting, whether it's credit referral, whether it's giving loans, whether it's helping the employer and the SMEs to keep going. And we've seen a lot of that has been happening around different countries in different scales. Now, when you look at the future perspective, I think what Chris has touched on is very important. The COVID-19 has explored the holes or the gaps in the labor market. And these are very important to be resolved and addressed by the government immediately. There is an old saying that says, don't let a good crisis go to waste. And there is a lot of lessons that learned from here. So informal jobs to be treated and to be resolved and provided with social protection for those who works on them is very critical issue to be addressed by the government leaders. Also, the flexibility, the different forms of work has to be looked into and taken out seriously to help the groups that cannot work from 9 to 5. So we need to kind of look at the job market and the labor market from a different perspective as we used to do so. And I think COVID-19 had made it clear and exposed to us what we needed to be done prior, but now it becomes, I guess, on a clearer level, if I will, to everyone. Lastly, the jobs that will lose, I don't think it's only in the lower end. I think it's in the middle, or anything that is routine jobs. the routine, it's going to be in the middle of the job rank, not in the bottom only, because the middle of the jobs, that's where you do a lot of routine jobs. And if the reports are correct, I think that there is a report that says 62% of organizational data will be automated. Usually that's done by the middle groups, not at the end level. Also, there is a study that says that 800 million, which I think will be more, will be automated by 2030. These are large number. So skilling, reskilling, or the transition, which Chris talked about, reskilling or upskilling people need to be supported and subsidized by the government, from my point of view.
But perhaps following on from that answer, and maybe Jenny may want to chip in on this, but we have a question from Barbara Ridpath asking whether it should be employers who are responsible for retraining employees whose jobs are going to disappear, which kind of melded with another question that's been put, which is what about those who haven't had adequate basic education? Where do we put the burden of educating people in this very fast changing world? Do you want to answer that one? Start with Jenny.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I do think, right, there's what we've seen is that what works best is when there's shared responsibility for how is it that we think about both preparing people for work, and then once they're sort of formally connected to the world of work, how is it that they're expected to upgrade their skills concurrent with all of the changes that we're describing. I have sat at dinners, and maybe others have as well, where members of the business community and members of the educational community sort of did this and kind of pointed at one another like, well, they're not perfect when you sent them off to us. Well, you know, it's your job to train them once they work for you, kind of thing. And I think, you know, where we see the opportunity is at the intersection of the two, truthfully. I will say, you know, just building on our experience as a company, this transition to employers really being places for lifelong learning is one that I think we just need to acknowledge. Companies are figuring that out. There are some who are perhaps very good and have been very good on that for a good long while, but I think one of the things that we hear when we're sitting around with peers and others is that this is a transition that they're actively working on. I think the question of how do you continue to center issues of equity within that discussion and make sure that as a business pursues its sort of lifelong learning, it thinks about how do you support people in understanding what kind of micro credentials or skill building is really going to support them. It's very similar to what I think we have to support others in the kind of educational and workforce ecosystem to do. I know we're short on time, so I'll wrap up. But the thing that we have seen, and I think we're all going to have to work on, is how do you do this all much more rapidly? Because I think sitting within a company, you see how quickly this is all changing, how quickly certain skills are in demand, new occupations require kind of new ways of doing things. How do we make sure we're sending that signal clearly into the education and workforce world? And how are they sort of meeting us also sort of midway and helping to train people in more rapid ways, in more kind of incrementable, buildable ways?
Great. I'm going to, because we're running out of time, just take two questions together and then give you each a chance to answer those, because I think they'll serve as quite a good wrap up for this session, which I'll let just run over very slightly if that's okay with everybody. So the first one, which kind of follows on from what's just been discussed from Crayon Butler, is asking what is the best way to build resilience in the global workforce, given the likelihood that the unprecedented shocks of things like COVID-19 will affect the viability of different jobs. Those unprecedented shocks, the one thing we'll know is that there may be more known unknowns or unknown unknowns. And how do we encourage or require people to make themselves resilient for that, maybe by saving more or by skills provision. And then I've got a question from Fernanda Bernaldo asking what role tech will play in work going forward. And if there may be more remote work and people find the benefits of that, will people come back, or will it may it be beneficial for us to embrace that? So some of these big changes about resilience and the changing place of work as well. What can we do to give people security in that world? Chris, do you want to start off with that one?
How long do we have to just
big
say?
Questions. Yeah, well, yeah.
I was going to take the initiative and say, well, Kieran asked the question where if we had another 2-3 hours, maybe we would get somewhere. Yeah. I mean, resilience. What I can say is watch the Institute for the Future of Work website, because it's exactly what we've been working on, and it's challenging us. And of course, you know, I'm sure as Kieran knows, the answer is so multidimensional. You know, we need to diversify work. We need to prepare the tech so that we take it on. We need to have skills that are more spread. We need diversity at work, because we know diverse companies that employ, you know, diversity across gender, race, so on. They're more productive. There is more resilience to them. There is an awful lot of empirical evidence that tells us what kind of local labor market and companies are more resilient to change. They're quicker to adapt, and all that. A lot, in fact, has come up in the past in Chatham House discussions. This time I will not do company advertising. I will not mention which companies will collaborate in this discussion, but I took part in it. So, I mean, it's an exciting and challenging area, and we're in the process of constructing an index of resilience, in fact, that will tell us what needs to be done and what's working faster. Now, the other question about tech is going to play an enormous role. I think we will never go back to a pre-COVID world where we all run to the office and squeezed into an underground train in London or New York or whatever to go to an office when you could do it from home. It's so wonderful to see. You sit there, you know. Maybe I've not been very kind to people who don't have wonderful studies at home. But
not all of us have a sea view, Chris.
Exactly. For those who have nice studies at home, apologies. I can see the working at home. I can see consultations taking place by phone. I mentioned before, doctors, nurses. I don't think we'll be rushing to our GP with this latest problem. They will develop the technology to do it online and everything else. And finally, I do feel very strong actually about the question that Barbara asked before. So let me answer it. The answer is no, I think. The employer who is introducing machinery to take over a job should not be providing the training, because that employer will not know what kind of job the person will go. It's the new employer who has to provide the training, and supported by government to do it, because it's the new employer who will be in the job creation business. The one who brought in a robot to take a job over has no idea where the employee is going to. So how can they do it? You know, obviously they'll be paying taxes and their contributions to support the government schemes, but that's all that they need to do. Could I take half a minute more? What Ilham said about routine jobs and lower jobs. Again, I apologize. I was talking on behalf of I was talking as to what's been happening to North America and Western Europe, to the mature industrial societies, which have already gone through the mid-range of skills substitution by computers and others, and other machinery. And they now moved on to the stage where robots are taking over lower skilled jobs in those economies. But in emerging countries, even in the very large ones like India and China, there are still a lot of routine mid-range jobs that will be replaced. So it was more of what kind of country group we had in mind when we were talking. That's why we seem to be talking about different things of technology. Apologies for taking so long.
No,
I learned how to speak faster than what I normally do.
Thank you very much, Chris. Ilham, would you like to comment on those issues?
Yes. With regard to technology, I'll just add one point that when COVID-19 hit, about 80% in the lockdown or full lockdown or partial lockdown of the working people were not able to work. They have to work remotely. And only 59% of those have access to either tools or internet to be able to do it. So that's a very important note to keep in mind and to resolve and address by leaders. The other thing, when it comes to building resilience labor market, I think we need to look at, I guess, 3 points. One is to look into, we need a global constructive collaboration. This is not thing that can be done by one country or some countries. It has to be globally done, and all stakeholders have to participate. That's one. Second, we need to look at the formal, how to strengthen the inclusiveness, dynamism, and diversity of the formal labor market. And lastly, to incentivize the informal sector to formalize. If we do these 3 things, I think that will put us in a better status than where we are today.
And by the informal sector, do you mean self-employed, or you?
It's anybody who is not have a full contract. It could be the migrants group, it could be the self-employed groups, it could be the part-time workers, it could be the hourly workers, anybody who does not have a full, that has a health coverage, social coverage, and so on. That's what we call informal.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
And Jenny.
Well, I'll just, sort of underscore a couple quick points here, but I think, technology, one of the things we don't want to lose sight of is it is making some jobs better as well, particularly certain tasks that were routine that could be automated, but they're only better if you can sort of travel along with that sort of improvement and maintain that job, or potentially move into a job at a higher wage. And so I think, Ilham's point again is one that I would underscore, which is not everybody is positioned to do that equally well. And we are every day making choices, even if that's by not making choices, about how we're supporting people moving through those transitions. I also, we've seen that there are some really compelling models that use tech to help people. I think this was one of the other questions, kind of really make breakthrough leaps in terms of the skills they're building. But many times those are paired with some kind of coaching or human interaction to help folks really figure out how you take that technical skill set and align it with those kind of foundational skills that are so critically important and are the things that aren't as easy to automate away. So I think, continuing to understand what is working and then using forums like this and all these task forces to kind of shine a brighter light and really incentivize action to drive more resources towards those solutions is going to be what we're going to have to just continue to do and really stick with.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you all for some really fascinating contributions to an extremely important and now extremely urgent debate. What I'd really like to do now is go off and have a cup of tea and continue this conversation. I can't do that, but on the other hand, I have had the opportunity to speak with wonderful and well-informed speakers in Cyprus, in New York, in Saudi Arabia, and all over the world, all of you joining in. So thank you very much. If you look in the chat box, you'll see that Chatham House have put the link to their upcoming Future of Work conference taking place virtually in October. So do check that out if you'd like to take a more lengthy look at some of these questions, but we've certainly made a fantastic start. So Chris, Ilham and Jenny, thank you all very much. And thank you all for joining us.